ja, vanuit echt adoptieperspectief non-events geweest zijn.
Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome to Call of X. I'm Nicolai. I'm here with Sander Mak at JFall.
Hi.
And Sander, introduce yourself before
Sure.
we start with
Hi.
the
topic. So my name is Sander. I work with Luminis, which is a software technology company here in the Netherlands. I'm also an author for O'Reilly and Pluralsight. So I've written, much like you, a book about the module system. So we have some common ground there. And
we're also in competition, so we're not having any links. You know, seriously, there will be a link to both of the books down there, and you can buy any what you want. Anyway, so yes, you also know a little about the module system, but it didn't start there, right? You were into modularity long time before that.
Exactly, yeah. So at Luminis we also used OSGi a lot, which is the alternative module system for Java, which was built next to Java.
Yeah.
Now we have a module system in Java itself, so that's quite a difference. But still we do have lots of code bases that still leverage OSGi as well. Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to start. If you would start these projects over with the modularity landscape as it is now, with the module system at your hands, even as young as it is and as not so much supported by the community as it is, are there many projects where you would decide now, because OSGi can do more things than the JMS or JPMS, how many projects would you say they don't use that much of OSGi? I would go with JPMS, or what's the trade-off there as you see it there?
I would say the majority of the applications is sort of like more enterprise-like, where much in a Spring-like fashion you wire everything together at the start of the application, and nothing too dynamic happens after that. And of course OSGi is very dynamic in this module system. You don't have to use those dynamics, but they're there, and we only use these in a smaller amount of applications, mainly around more IoT device scenarios.
So that's the main differentiating point for you, the OSGi versus the Java module system. The main difference is there are other differences, but is that what comes mostly down to you for most projects? The dynamic behavior of containers coming and going?
If I would frame it in terms of the biggest design difference between the two, then that would be it. Yeah.
And that would also be the feature set that you say is most valuable outside of the module system that you still rely on in some cases.
We do,
Okay. Yeah. But in the other ones, do you feel like so the other ones you say the module system would be just as fine. Would you then prefer it for some reason, or do you say, well, even if I don't use the dynamic features of OSGi, it doesn't really matter which one I use?
Well, I prefer it in the sense that it's now native in the platform, and that's always a win, especially if you look at terms of tooling and adoption there. OSGi has always sort of been lagging behind, and I mean, lots of people did great work there, but it was just a small crew of people who had to do everything for Eclipse and Maven tooling, etc. Which is getting better every day, but you don't have the whole community, so to say, behind you. So whereas with the module system now, it was already implemented by Eclipse and JetBrains and all the usual suspects very, very quickly. So
I think that's one of the main advantages I see with the module system as well. So I have no actual experience with OSGi, so take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But yes, my impression was also from the outside that tool support was like not always as good as people wanted it. And also I think that there's few features building on top of that. So for example, now I expect way more mainstream tools to just give you more insight into how modules work, or how the modularity of your system works. So I guess not because the module system does that better or prepares that better than the OSGi and than OSGi does. I think just by the amount of the adoption, just by the number of people using it actively or even passively by running on the modular runtime. So I hope at least that we'll see more push towards that. Like even now, for example, when you look at Java 8 with lambdas and streams, even now IDEs are including new features, so that's like ages old. So I think there's a lot, ages, like 4 years, almost 5
ages in terms of IT, right?
So I think lots of things are still coming, I hope, in that area.
There's one caveat though, if you compare OSGi and the current incarnation of the module system. OSGi really has a strong model around services, and module system in Java also has the notion of services, right? But it's a bit low level, the service loader API, and people tend to prefer programming models like Spring, dependency injection, things like that. And there's not a great story yet, in my opinion, bridging these two worlds. Whereas in OSGi, they're very tightly intertwined. They have the services model, which is also defined by OSGi, and there's the modularity layer, which is also defined by OSGi. And in that sense, they do still have somewhat of an edge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give a concrete example of that? As I said, I'm also a noob. So what? I mean, I know how the Java module system services work, and as you said, you basically at some point you just go to the service loader and do this load thing, and then you get a bunch of classes back, and then if you want to filter based on something, you all have to do that manually.
So OSGi has a similar service registry, which you can fill programmatically if you want to, but there's also a very nice annotation-based API which does the work for you. So you sort of get close to the dependency injection scenario where you just add an annotation to a class and it will be published as a service for its interface, and you get to inject it in some field in another class, and that may be in a different module, and then OSGi will wire this together based on these annotations. Which is very close to how people think about dependency injection in Spring and Juice and situations like that.
Well, that feels like dependency injection frameworks could start relying on the. I mean, you can have that injected based on the annotations and stuff. What you cannot. Well, even then you have to update the module descriptor though, right? So you have to have some kind of IDE support. Yeah. So just the annotation would never be enough. The IDE would then, most likely the IDE, because it already starts doing this kind of things, would then they say, hey, I saw you. It's
definitely possible to layer this on top, I believe, on the service loader mechanism in Java. It's just interesting that hasn't really happened yet, and not in any sense of real adaptation.
Yeah, I think everybody, not everybody, but many libraries and frameworks, they now work on Java 9 or 11, but like actually starting to use the module system, that's still lagging behind. I think that's kind of natural because it doesn't make a lot of sense to start really aggressively adopting module system features until you baseline against the version that has it. Yeah. So
that's exactly also the message of my talk at this conference here. So I sort of did a retrospective looking back on the last year after Java 9. So what has happened in terms of the module system. And what you see there is that the adoption rates of Java 9 and Java 10, even notwithstanding the module system, are very low. So naturally, and the adoption of the modules and module system itself is also low. And with Java 11, I think we all believe that there's a turning point in the community. So people will start migrating from 8 to 11. And this also means that people, for the first time, will be exposed to this feature. So in that sense, I think the best is yet to come.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. So I asked people at the talk, like, who's using, what kind of Java versions, and I found that basically everybody's using 8. It's not even like a normal distribution. It's just like everybody's on 8, and then you got like a handful of percent below, but you also already have a handful of percent above. So I feel like these are already on equal footing. So I really hope that this will work in the future to have more people going to 11. Yeah. So I was asking you. Oh yeah, right. One thing. So you just mentioned your talk. You had a couple of messages or something that you told people like you should look into this. Like repeat a couple of the most important ones here.
Yeah. So one of the first ones is we get it. People didn't really use Java 9 and 10, but 11 is here to stay, right? Long-term support. So this is the time to get looking at the features and then to immerse yourself in this new world. So that's the first message. The other one was more geared towards library maintenance. So what we see, I together with some people did some scanning on Maven Central, and we see that.
Also, going to leave a link in the description box. That's a really interesting thing that you're doing there. Yeah.
So what we did there is we looked at all the libraries that's been pushed in August. So just monitoring small periods, and then we saw that. About 1% of these libraries, only 1% had a module descriptor, and about 9% of the libraries had this automatic module name header, which is sort of a placeholder to indicate, okay, I'm usable as an automatic module under this name, which is good, but it's too low. So now is also the time to start speaking to library maintainers, authors, vocalize the requests around, okay, please have a look at this. And it's not that hard to enable a library as an automatic module. And even taking the next step, if your library doesn't have dependencies, for example, is sort of trivial. So
I think that I think this is actually something that can maybe not be pushed, but more be pulled. So if people starting new projects now, I think new projects will naturally start on 11. And for a new project, I would also argue it's natural to start with the module system because while it can be a lot of work to migrate a legacy application, well, first of all, migrate it across the 9 bump to 11, but then also to modularize an application that consists of dozens or hundreds of Maven modules, or Gradle, whatever, like a kind of couple 2 or 3 digit jars, number of jars. That can be a lot of work, and it might feel like it's not really worth it. I would argue it might be, or very well might be, because usually when you come into a position when you realize, oh wow, this is hard, this is usually an indicator of that specific part of your program is not well modularized, and you're going to benefit from doing that. So I think much of the pain, it's also what OSGi usually says. People think OSGi is complex. No, it's modularity.
True.
Or not, maybe not complex is the right word, but that's not trivial.
Yeah.
And OSGi is not adding that much complexity at all. And I think that I'm not talking about how much complexity OSGi adds. I can't speak to that. But yes, I would say properly modularizing the application is a lot of work, particularly if you start it later. So I think for new projects, it will be natural to start with the module system. And because like even if you realize after half a year, it's like too many of my dependencies don't do this well and it's too much of a fight, it's just the removal of one file. So even if push comes to shove, you can back out easily.
Sure, and you still have a modularized application even if you don't have modular descriptors, right?
Yeah. So and I think if more people try that, then they maybe actually pull from these applications into the libraries and frameworks. And like, look, we use this now. Can you please follow suit and just give us the minimum amount? And the automatic module name is definitely the minimum library developers should do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Once they verified that it works, don't just throw it in there.
No.
do the hard work first. Anything else you want to add?
So I'm also very, very interested in how the module system will evolve, if at all. So
true.
Some thoughts on that are interesting. Of course, there's the versioning, right? The big can of worms. But still, I mean, we get to express a version of a module at this moment. That's possible. Why not use this for at least checking versions, etc.? That will be a worthwhile addition, in my opinion. Though I do know how contentious this topic is.
Yeah. So what you're arguing is, so just to recap. The module system doesn't really care about versions. You can embed that information, but it doesn't really process it in any meaningful way. And so the thing that we once hoped was we have two different versions of the same module running, and that's really very unlikely to happen.
Well, I would even argue that that's a bad practice, and that's not what I'm advocating for. But I do want to detect if I have some conflicts and somehow need to resolve stuff there.
Right. So so what exactly were you getting at? So what you would think? So we should first of all, I think build tools should just start embedding the module, the version that you put into the build tool. They should start embedding that into the modular jar once you build it. I think they don't do it yet. I'm not sure.
Maven doesn't, at least.
I think that's one thing that you should do, that they should do. And then what exactly were you hoping for? So then the module system launches, and then what? It detects like you have dependencies. You express dependencies on two different versions, or you have two different versions on the module path, or what exactly are you hoping
the
for?
hardest issue is, of course, when transitively you get two dependencies in different versions, right? And I would really like the module system to also be mindful of this, and it sort of does. If you have everything on a single directory module path, then it will complain, but there are situations where it doesn't. When expressing requires dependencies in modules, it might be sensible to think about shouldn't a version be part of this as well in some way. And I'm not saying there are perfect solutions there, but at least it could do more than just today.
I thought about that as well, but one thing I wonder is, because usually the thing with the versions is that you want to actually express a range.
Yeah.
But at the time you're writing, you don't know what the range will be, right? You're depending on Guava 21. You don't know whether it's going to be 25 or 28 that drops the feature that you're using, right? So
it brings you back to the whole semantic versioning discussion, and if people really get this and apply this. So I know it's a kind of
but I think semantic versioning is really not... Well, people like Google literally does semantic versioning, but not in a way that is very meaningful. They just update the major version every time, so that really doesn't help you a whole lot.
True.
With that, yes. Yeah, so I'm skeptical about versions as well. One thing you said, that you don't advocate for having two different versions of the same thing running, and so I'm torn on that. I come down on the same side, but I've, like in a big project, you know how it is, right? Every time you update dependencies, you have to put into work to make sure that all the things align. That's what Spring Boot does basically by saying like, look, we decided these versions for you.
This is the baseline.
Just pick these. Never mind which log4j version you want to have. Just use ours, the one we specify. And I think that came from a lot of experience. And so in big projects, when you update something, it's always like a can of worms. You're pulling some thread. You're like, let's see whether this even works. We can only find out by trying it. And so it sounds like that would be just so nice to run just two different versions of Guava and be fine with it. But then imagine, we're already in a position where you have like tons of jars, like you have like an application and then a pyramid of dependencies below that. Imagine how horrible that would be if you would start multiplying that some parts of those by 2, by 3, by 5, and you end up like with that would really that would increase deployment size. I would likely say would still increase. It will still make some kinds of errors more likely, or at least harder to find. So unifying all this, making this tree flat into a single path, and then say, look, now we have to just have everything just once.
I know
That's
there's
painful, but I think it's a necessary continuous work.
I know there's a tension between theory and practice here.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. But I also have worked on OSGi systems where we can have multiple versions of the same library, and in the end, it always comes back to bite you. So that's at least my experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Even though it can be made to work, there will be some case where it doesn't, and then you're still in pain.
Yeah, particularly with the fact that if you do that by class lower isolation, then you end up with a situation where things that should be equal won't be equal.
Exactly.
And I would guess that this is the most likely thing. Like somebody gives you something which is supposed to be, I don't know, like an. The problem is
some sort of Guava collection, and you have a different version of collection, and it won't be the same.
Guava collection works fine, but what you like, I usually try the first example I always come with is list, but actually list would work because you are supposed to test against the list interface the equals. So if you have two different implementations of list, they can be equal. So that actually works. But you're right. Actually, the Guava mutable list, for example, or these bimaps that they have. Like you have Guava twice, you get one bimap here, one bimap here, just start to equal, and things fall apart. And I would assume that might be surprising. And that version conflict is most likely not the first thing that comes to mind, at least unless you're very experienced. Right, so like if you have to, like you see something breaks in the you see like, okay, these things aren't equal. Why aren't these equal?
Yeah, exactly. So that can be very surprising and hard to debug.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Sander, for being here for the interview.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. And now we go out and have more fun at the conference.
Sure, let's do that.
Bye.
Bye.